Tiana Jackson stepped out of the Fulton County Courthouse into the thick Atlanta heat, her sneakers scuffing the pavement as she replayed Officer Victor Malone's courtroom sneer in her mind, his lips curling like he'd tasted something sour when the judge tossed her case. She was 32, lean from years of running trails, her skin a deep brown that caught the late afternoon sun, and her mind a steel trap honed by 8 years at the NSA, where she'd unraveled cybercrime webs from DC to Dubai. Today's win felt good. A clean jab against a racist cop who'd pulled her over 3 weeks ago on a quiet Decatur road, claiming her taillight was busted when she knew damn well it wasn't, his flashlight tapping her window like a taunt as he demanded her license with that smug drawl she'd heard too many times growing up black in Georgia. She'd stayed cool then, handing over her papers, but his "you people always argue" had lit a spark she couldn't shake, not when she'd spent her career dismantling bigger monsters than him. This mission wasn't about terrorists or hackers, though it was local, personal, a chance to peel back the rot festering in Atlanta's underbelly. A corruption ring she'd sniffed out after a tip from an old informant, one that tied cops like Malone to dirty money and dirtier deeds. She adjusted her backpack, her simple gray hoodie blending into the crowd as she cut through downtown, her pulse steady despite the victory, because she knew men like Malone didn't slink off quietly, not when their pride got bruised in public. She was right. Across town, Victor Malone stormed into the precinct on Trinity Avenue, his boots thudding against the linoleum, his broad frame filling the doorway like a bull ready to charge, all 45 years of him packed into a buzz cut, and a uniform starched stiff with arrogance. His face was red, veins bulging at his temples as he slammed Tiana's thin court file onto his desk, the dismissal papers crumpling under his meaty fist, his grey eyes narrowing as he muttered about that uppity chick who dared to make him look small in front of Judge Reynolds. He'd been on the force 20 years, racked up commendations for busting petty dealers in Bankhead, but the whispers about his rough stops, the ones that always seemed to hit black drivers hardest, never stuck, not with his knack for making evidence vanish and witnesses clam up. Today's loss stung worse than most, a public slap from some nobody who wouldn't bow, and he couldn't let it stand, not when his buddies at the bar would rib him for weeks, not when his whole game relied on fear keeping folks in line. He yanked open his laptop, fingers jabbing at the keys as he pulled up Tiana's name, her address popping up from the traffic stop report, a modest apartment off Flat Shoals Road in Decatur. Nothing fancy, nothing to suggest she was more than she seemed. Her job listed as data analyst at some no-name tech firm raised his hackles, too vague for his liking, and that cool stare she'd leveled at him in court gnawed at him like she knew something he didn't. He didn't buy it, not for a second, and his gut told him she was hiding trouble, maybe drugs, maybe worse, something he could pin on her to flip this whole mess back in his favor. He grabbed his phone, dialed a burner number he kept for off-book moves, his voice low as he barked at a desk jockey he'd leaned on before, a twitchy guy named Pete, who owed him for burying a DUI last year, telling him to log a fake tip into the system, mark Tiana Jackson as a suspected mule running pills out of her place. Make it sound urgent, make it stick. Pete hesitated, stammering about protocol, but Malone cut him off, growling that he'd better do it or face a midnight visit from some boys who didn't ask twice, and Pete caved, the tip hitting the wire by 6 that evening, flagged for immediate action. Malone leaned back, cracking his knuckles, picturing her smug face when the hammer dropped, because if she thought a courtroom win would save her, she was dead wrong. Tiana got home by 7, the sky bruising purple over Decatur, as she unlocked her second-floor unit, a one-bedroom she'd rigged with subtle upgrades, motion sensors on the windows, a trapdoor under the rug leading to a crawl space she'd carved out herself, tricks she'd learned from years in the field where paranoia wasn't a flaw but a lifeline. She dropped her keys on the counter, flipped on a lamp that cast a soft glow over her Spartan setup, a futon, a desk piled with encrypted drives, a single photo of her mom pinned to the fridge, the woman who'd raised her alone after her dad split, telling her to fight smart, not just hard. She fired up her laptop, pulling up the day's notes, her fingers dancing over keys as she logged the court win into a secure NSA portal, her cover as a civilian holding steady, her real job chasing threads of corruption that stretched from Malone's badge to who knew where, A puzzle she'd been piecing together since that stop when his "people like you" hit her like a brick, echoing every slight she'd swallowed growing up. She'd barely saved her report when her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Tate, her NSA partner, a wiry 38-year-old with a scar over his left brow from a Kabul op gone sideways. His message short. "Check your 6 hearing chatter." She frowned, tapped into a back door she'd built into Atlanta PD's dispatch, and froze, her screen flashing a priority alert. Her name in bold, Tiana Jackson, suspected narcotics trafficking, armed and dangerous, SWAT dispatched. Her heart kicked up a notch, not from fear but from the sheer gall of it. Malone moving faster than she'd clocked, twisting her win into a knife aimed at her back. She didn't have time to curse. The faint thump of boots on the stairs jolting her upright, her sensors blinking red as shadows moved outside her window, black-clad figures stacking up against her door, rifles glinting in the streetlight's haze. She grabbed her go-bag, a pre-packed kit with cash, a burner phone, and a Glock she'd never fired stateside, her mind racing as she calculated exits, the front a no-go with SWAT piling in, the fire escape too exposed with snipers likely perched. Across the lot. She yanked up the rug, popped the trapdoor, and slid into the crawl space just as her front door splintered, wood cracking under a battering ram, shouts of "Police, open up!" bouncing off the walls she'd just left. Dust stung her eyes as she belly-crawled through the tight space, her elbows scraping concrete, the trap leading to a vent she'd loosened months ago, a precaution she'd hoped she'd never need, but thanked her past self for now. Above, boots stomped her floor, glass shattered as they tossed her place, a voice barking, "She's not here, fan out," as she pushed the vent free, dropping into an alley behind the building, the night swallowing her as sirens wailed blocks away. She pulled her hood tight, her breath steady despite the chaos, because this wasn't just a raid. It was Malone's first swing, a racist cop turning a bruised ego into a full-on assault, betting she'd fold under the weight of a system. He'd gamed for years. She slipped into the shadows, her pulse a drumbeat of resolve. Because if he thought a fake tip and some muscle would bury her, he'd underestimated the wrong woman, and she'd make damn sure he paid for it. Back at the precinct, Malone got the call, his radio crackling with the SWAT leader's gruff update. "Target's gone, place is clean, no drugs, just some tech gear we can't crack." His jaw tightened, a vein pulsing in his neck as he pictured Tiana slipping through his fingers, that calm stare mocking him again, and he slammed his fist on the desk, the sting of failure sharper than the courtroom loss, because now she wasn't. Just a nuisance. She was a ghost he couldn't pin down. He scrolled her file again, that data analyst line glaring back at him, and a cold itch crept up his spine, a flicker of doubt he shoved down hard, because no way some black chick from Decatur could outsmart him, not with his badge, his boys, his plan. He dialed Pete again, his voice a snarl. "Find me something else, anything, I want her crushed," and hung up, staring out the precinct window into the dark, his smirk gone, replaced by a hunger to see her bleed, because this wasn't over, not by a long shot, and he'd burn the city down before he let her walk away clean. Tiana Jackson crouched in the shadows of a safe house tucked near Stone Mountain, her knees pressed into the hardwood floor of a cramped attic, the air thick with the scent of pine and dust as she watched the world through a slatted window, the jagged silhouette of the mountain looming against a sky streaked with dawn's first light. She'd slipped out of Decatur 12 hours ago, her heart still pounding from the SWAT raid that tore her apartment apart, Malone's racist vendetta turning a courtroom win into a night of dodging rifles and lies. But now she was here. A spot she'd prepped months ago. A nondescript cabin off a dirt road, its walls lined with foil to block signals, its power rigged to a solar panel she'd installed herself. She was safe for now, her Glock resting on a rickety table beside a burner phone and a laptop that hummed faintly. Her lifeline to Marcus Tate, her NSA partner who'd texted her to lay low while he sniffed out the raid's source. She stretched, her legs, her runner's frame aching from the crawlspace escape, her mind replaying Malone's slur from the courthouse steps. "You'll regret this," his voice a gravelly promise she knew he'd keep, because men like him didn't lose, quietly, especially not to a black woman who dared to stand tall. She'd spent 8 years chasing shadows for the NSA, her cover as a data analyst a perfect mask, but this mission hit different, a chance to gut the corruption festering in Atlanta, A city she'd called home since she was a kid, dodging taunts. On the playground for being too dark, too loud, too much. She cracked her knuckles, pulled up her laptop, and dialed Marcus on an encrypted line, his voice crackling through, sharp and steady. "Tiana, you good?" She nodded, though he couldn't. See, her words clipped. "Yeah, but Malone's moving fast. What's the word?" Marcus, 38, wiry with a scar slicing his brow from a bomb blast he'd never talk about, was holed up in a DC office, his fingers flying over keys as he dug into Atlanta PD's system, his tone grim. "That SWAT tip?" Bogus came. From a ghost line, no trace. But it's got Malone's stink all over it. He's got someone inside feeding him grease. Tiana's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing as she tapped into the precinct's dispatch logs herself. Her NSA training kicking in, her screen flooding with data she sifted like a miner panning for gold, and there it was, a timestamp showing. The tip logged at 6 last night, just hours after the gavel fell, the details too thin to hold water. Suspected narcotics, armed. A lie so blatant it screamed setup. She leaned back, her pulse quickening with a mix of fury and focus, because this wasn't just Malone flexing. It was him betting she'd crack under the weight of a system he'd twisted to crush her kind for years. She typed fast, her fingers a blur as she packaged the log with a memo. Raid on Tiana Jackson, no evidence, tip falsified, and fired it off to Marcus with a single line, "Get this to the press." He grunted approval. On it, give me 2 hours, and she killed the call, her mind already spinning the next move, because if Malone wanted war, she'd hit him where it hurt, his reputation, his shield, the one thing he thought no one could touch. By noon, Marcus had worked his magic, slipping the leak to a scrappy reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, a young guy named Eli who'd built a name digging into police scandals, his inbox pinging with Tiana's file, anonymous, but airtight, the kind of scoop that'd make his editor drool. Eli ran it hard, the story breaking online by 3. Atlanta cops fake tip sparks illegal raid on black woman's home, the headline screaming across screens, the article tearing into Malone's suspension-worthy stunt, no drugs found, no warrant beyond a flimsy call. The raid a glaring overreach that had neighbors texting photos of smashed furniture and bullet-pocked walls. Tiana watched it spread from her laptop, the cabin's silence broken by the ping of notifications as the piece went viral, Twitter lighting up with "Chas Justice for Tiana," folks in Bankhead and Buckhead alike calling Malone a thug in blue, his precinct switchboard jammed with complaints by 5. She allowed herself a tight smile, her chest loosening as word came down an hour later. Malone suspended pending review, the chief's voice on a live stream stiff with damage control. "We take these allegations seriously. Officer Malone will face a full inquiry." Tiana exhaled, leaning against the attic wall, the wood cool against her back as she pictured Malone's red face twisting at the news, his badge yanked, his boys at the bar turning silent because she'd turned his swing into a boomerang, and damn, it felt good. She texted Marcus, "We got him," and he shot back, "For now." A caution she brushed off because this win wasn't just a dodge, it was a strike. Proof she could outsmart a system built to bury her. She cracked a bottle of water, took a long sip, her mind easing for the first time in days because Malone was down, the press was howling, and she'd bought herself breathing room to dig deeper, to find the threads tying him to the rot she'd sworn to rip out. But across town, Malone wasn't done, not even close, his suspension a slap he'd shrug off like a mosquito bite, because he had bigger cards to play, ones Tiana couldn't see from her mountain perch. He slumped in a dive bar off Marietta Street, the kind with sticky floors and neon signs buzzing over cracked booths. His uniform swapped for a stained polo, his buzz cut damp with sweat as he nursed a beer, the TV above the counter blaring Eli's story. His name a punching bag for every talking head in Atlanta. His fists clenched, knuckles whitening as he replayed Tiana's calm stare in court, her voice on that leaked log shredding his raid. And he growled under his breath, "She thinks she's smart, huh?" The bartender, a grizzled guy named Lou who'd seen Malone's rants before, slid him another bottle, but Malone barely noticed, his mind churning, because suspension didn't mean defeat, not when he had family in high places, blood thicker than any badge. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number he rarely used, his uncle Harold Reese picking up on the second ring, his voice smooth as oil. "Victor, what's this mess I'm hearing?" Malone snarled, "Some chick screwing me over, Uncle Hal. Fake tip didn't stick. Now she's got the press on my ass. I need this buried." Reese, 62, a councilman with a silver mane and a smile that won elections, sat in his downtown office, the city skyline sprawling behind him. His desk cluttered with plats for new condos, his real game a shadow network of cops, developers, and gang muscle that kept his pockets fat and his enemies quiet. He'd pulled Malone out of jams before, a speeding ticket here, a brutality rap there, but this was public, messy, a spotlight he didn't like. He tapped a pen, his tone cool. "You're sloppy, Vic, but I'll handle it. She's just one woman, right?" Malone grunted. "Yeah, but she's got guts too calm for my liking." Reese chuckled, a sound like gravel shifting. "Guts break. Easy, I'll call in a favor. Get you back on the street, then we hit her hard, no more games." Malone smirked, draining his beer, the sting of suspension fading as Reese's words sank in. Because his uncle wasn't just a fixer, he was a kingpin, and Tiana's little win was about to crash into a wall she couldn't climb. Reese hung up, dialed a deputy chief he owned, his voice all silk. "Reinstate my nephew, call it a paperwork error and make it quick." By nightfall, Malone's suspension lifted, a memo citing insufficient evidence hitting the precinct, and he strutted back to his desk, his smirk reborn, because Tiana might have landed a punch, but Reese was about to drop a bomb, and she'd never see it coming. Tiana, blissfully unaware, powered down her laptop, the attic dimming as she stretched out on a cot, her mind drifting to a rare calm, because she'd won this round, hadn't she? But what storm was brewing behind Malone's silence? Drop a comment with a 1 if you think Tiana's got this in the bag, or a 2 if you're betting Malone's got a nastier trick up his sleeve. Smash that like button if you're raging at how deep this corruption runs, and subscribe because tomorrow's twist will flip everything you think you know. So, what's Reese planning that'll make Tiana's victory taste like ash? Tiana Jackson laced up her running shoes in the early morning haze, the air crisp with the scent of dew-soaked grass as she stepped onto a winding trail in Piedmont Park, her lean frame cutting through the stillness, her breath puffing in steady bursts as she pushed her pace, the rhythm a balm after days of dodging Malone's wrath. She'd been cooped up in the Stone Mountain safe house too long, the press leak still buzzing online, Malone's suspension a fragile win she could almost taste. And this run was her reward, a chance to feel the sun on her skin, the city waking, up around her with joggers and dog walkers dotting the paths. She wore a black tank top and leggings, her hair pulled into a tight ponytail, her Glock tucked in a concealed holster at her waist, a habit from years of NSA fieldwork, where danger never slept. But today she felt lighter, the weight of the raid lifting as she rounded a bend near the lake, the water glinting gold in the dawn. She didn't see the trap until it was too late, her sedan parked 50 feet away in a gravel lot. The one she'd driven from Decatur before ditching it for the cabin, a car she hadn't touched in days, suddenly erupting in a fireball that shook the ground, a deafening boom splitting the air as flames roared skyward, shrapnel slicing through the trees, a jagged shard grazing her arm, drawing a thin line of blood she barely felt over the adrenaline surging through her veins. She dove behind a bench, her ears ringing as screams erupted from scattered runners, her eyes darting to the wreckage, black smoke billowing thick and acrid, the heat prickling her skin even from this distance. Atlanta PD rolled in fast, sirens wailing as squad cars screeched into the lot, uniforms swarming the scene, a bullhorn blaring about a gas leak. But Tiana knew better, her gut twisting as she spotted Victor Malone among them, his broad frame, unmistakable even off-duty, his buzz cut glinting under the rising sun, a smirk tugging at his lips as he surveyed the chaos like a hunter proud of his kill. She stayed low, her breath shallow, her mind racing as she pieced it together. Malone back on the street, his suspension gone like it never happened, and this bomb no accident. A message carved in fire and steel, his way of saying her little. Press stunt wouldn't stop him. She pulled out her burner phone, her fingers trembling slightly, as she texted Marcus Tate, "Car just blew, Malone's here, dig into it," and slipped deeper into the brush, her sneakers sinking into mud as she circled wide, keeping him in her sights. Marcus hunched over a desk in D.C., his scar catching the glow of his monitor, got the ping and cursed under his breath, his hands flying across keys as he tapped into city records, tracing the bomb's signature, a crude mix of fertilizer and diesel that screamed gang work, not some random spark. He cross-checked chatter from Atlanta's underworld, landing on the Red Claws, a crew tied to Councilman Harold Reese, Malone's uncle, a shadow player who'd greased his nephew's reinstatement overnight. The deputy chief's memo, a flimsy cover for a favor called in from high up. Marcus shot back, "Red Claws hit Reese's muscle, watch your back," and Tiana's jaw clenched, her arm stinging as she wiped blood on her sleeve, because this wasn't just Malone anymore. It was a syndicate flexing, a network she'd barely scratched, and they'd come for her hard. She edged closer to the scene, her phone now recording as Malone swaggered past a rookie cop, his voice carrying over the crackle of cooling metal. "Guess she learned her lesson, huh?" His tone dripping with glee, his gray eyes scanning the crowd like he hoped she'd pop up just to see his handiwork. Tiana zoomed in, catching every word, his smug laugh as he added, "Should have stayed in her place. No jury's gonna back a black chick over me. Not here." The slur he'd hissed in court, now a full-on boast. His racism laid bare for her. Lens, a taunt that lit a fire in her chest. Not fear, but fury, because he thought this would break her. Thought she'd run scared from a blast, meant to silence her. She stopped recording, her mind sharp despite the chaos, because this was gold. Proof of his intent, his hate, his ties to something bigger, and she'd use it, not just to survive, but to hit back harder. She slipped away, blending into a cluster of gawkers as fire trucks rolled in, her arm throbbing but her resolve ironclad. Because Malone had upped the stakes, turned a petty feud into attempted murder, and she wouldn't let it slide. She found a payphone near the park's edge, her burner too hot to risk, and dialed Marcus, her voice low. "I've got him gloating on tape. I'm confronting him, then suing. This ends now." Marcus hissed, "Tiana, wait, he's got backup." But she hung up, her feet already carrying her to the precinct on Trinity Avenue, her blood-smeared tank top a badge of survival as she stormed through the glass doors, the lobby buzzing with morning shift grunts who froze when they saw her presence a shockwave cutting through their coffee chatter. Malone was there, leaning on the front desk, his polo stretched tight over his gut as he bragged to a clerk about cleaning up trash. But his words died when Tiana stepped up, her phone out, the video cued as she locked eyes with him, her voice steady. "You think a bomb's gonna shut me up, Victor?" His smirk faltered, his hand twitching toward his hip where his service piece usually sat. But he was off duty. No gun, just fists, he bawled as she hit play, his own voice echoing loud in the tiled space. Should have stayed in her place. The slur ringing out, the rookie cops behind him shifting uncomfortably as the clerk's jaw dropped. Tiana didn't flinch, her stare boring into him. "I'm suing you, Malone. For this. For the raid. For every lie you've spewed. You're done." He laughed, a harsh bark that didn't reach his eyes, his face flushing red as he leaned in close, his breath sour with beer. "Go ahead, sweetheart. No jury in Georgia's gonna side with you over a cop, not with your skin, not in my town." She held her ground, her arm dripping blood onto the floor, a crimson puddle he glanced at with a sneer. "Looks like you're already losing." But she smiled, thin and cold. "We'll see," and turned on her heel, leaving him seething. As she strode out, her phone already uploading the clip to Marcus with a note. "File it now." She hit the street, her pulse hammering but her head clear, because she'd faced him down, turned his trap into her weapon, and she'd sue him blind, drag his name through every court in Atlanta until he choked on it. Malone watched her go, his fists unclenching as he grabbed a desk phone, dialing Reese, his voice a snarl. "She's got a video, confronted me, says she's suing, we need to crush her." Reese, in his high-rise office, swirled a glass of bourbon, his silver hair catching the light as he listened, his mind ticking over the mess his nephew had made, because a bomb was bold, sloppy, and now Tiana had proof, a noose tightening around Malone's neck that could drag him down too. He sipped his drink, his voice calm. "Relax, Vic, she's one woman, we'll spin this, make her the villain, I've got to play, just sit tight." Malone hung up, his smirk creeping back, because Reese always had a fix, and Tiana's little stunt would crash into a wall she couldn't see, a counterstrike that'd make her car bomb look like a firecracker. Tiana, blocks away, patched her arm with a rag from her bag, her mind racing as she hailed a cab to a new hideout. Because she'd won this round, hadn't she? Malone's arrogance caught on tape, his career teetering, but why did her gut twist like the fight was just beginning? Tiana Jackson sat in a dimly lit midtown diner, her arm bandaged from the car bomb's graze. The sting a dull ache as she sipped black coffee, her burner phone buzzing with Marcus Tate's latest update. Videos filed, lawsuits a go, you're set. She'd barely slept since confronting Malone at the precinct yesterday. His racist taunt, "No jury's gonna back a black chick," looping in her skull. But she'd turned his words into fuel, her resolve hardening as she filed a civil suit against him that morning, her NSA honed precision crafting a complaint that hit like a sledgehammer, accusing him of harassment, attempted murder, and racial profiling. The recording from the precinct lobby, her ace, his voice sneering through. Every speaker she'd hand to a judge. She'd slipped into Fulton County Court at 9, her grey hoodie swapped for a crisp blazer, her ponytail tucked under a cap, her lean frame blending into the bustle of lawyers and clerks as she submitted the paperwork herself, no attorney, just her because she knew the system's tricks better than most. 8 years of decoding legal traps for the agency, giving her an edge Malone couldn't dream of. She'd attached the mechanics report too, a guy named Ray who'd checked her sedan 2 days before the stop, his affidavit swearing the tail light glowed bright as a July sun, proof Malone's citation was a lie from the jump. A pretext, to flex his badge on a black woman who wouldn't cower. By noon she was back in court, not as a defendant but a plaintiff, the hearing room packed with suits and spectators, the air humming with tension, as Judge Carla Evans, a stern 50-something, with a no-nonsense squint called the case, her salt-and-pepper bangs framing a face that had seen every dodge in the book. Tiana stood at the plaintiff's podium, her voice steady as she laid out the facts. Officer Malone targeted me with a false stop, raided my home with a fake tip, and bombed my car to intimidate me. Here's the proof. Her phone plugged. Into the court's audio, Malone's gloat filling the space. Guess she learned her lesson. Followed by that gut punch, "No jury's gonna back a black chick over me." The room going still as his bigotry hung heavy, a juror's gasp. Breaking the silence, she slid Ray's report across, her eyes locked on Malone, who slouched beside a twitchy city lawyer, his buzz cut damp with sweat, his grey eyes darting like a cornered dog as the judge's gaze sharpened, her pen tapping the bench. Malone's. Dashcam logs were next, ordered up after the suit, and he squirmed as the city handed over a stack of malfunction reports. Every stop Tiana flagged conveniently blank, a pattern too neat to be chance, her voice cutting through. "He's got a history of this, Your Honor, and it's all on him." The lawyer stammered, "We dispute the mechanic, maybe the light flickered." But Ray took the stand, a wiry 40-year-old in grease-stained overalls, his drawl firm. "Checked it myself, no flicker, no fault. That car was solid." His words a nail in Malone's coffin as the judge's frown deepened, her fingers flipping through the logs, her voice dry. "These malfunctions seem selective, officer. Care to explain?" Malone muttered, "Tech's old, happens all." The time, but the lie hung limp, and Tiana pressed, "Not every time it's a black driver complaining though, right?" The gallery murmured, the judge's gavel tapping for quiet as she ruled, "I'm granting the plaintiff's motion. $10,000 in damages. Investigation into Officer Malone's conduct to follow. Case closed." Tiana's chest swelled. Not at the money, but the win. Malone's face purpling as he shoved past his lawyer, his boots thudding out of the room, the weight of her strike landing square on his jaw. She met Marcus that night at a dive off Peachtree, her first real meal in days. A plate of fries and a soda she savored as he grinned across the booth, his scar crinkling. "You nailed him, T. He's cooked." She nodded, her tension easing as they toasted with chipped glasses, the diner's jukebox humming a slow tune because she'd turned Malone's bomb into her victory, his career teetering on the edge, and she could almost see the finish line, a corrupt cop down, the rot exposed. But Harold Reese wasn't celebrating, his silver hair glinting under the fluorescent buzz of his downtown office as he scrolled a far-right blog on his laptop, his bourbon glass sweating on the desk. His nephew's loss a thorn he couldn't pull. He'd reinstated Malone after the raid flop, but this lawsuit, this $10,000 slap was public, messy, a crack in the armor of his shadow network, cops and developers and Red Claw's muscle who kept his real estate empire humming, gentrifying black neighborhoods block by block. He'd watched the precinct video leak online, Malone's black chick line trending, and his lip curled, not at the words but the fallout, because Tiana wasn't just a thorn, she was a blade, and he'd underestimated her, a mistake he wouldn't repeat. He dialed a fixer, a guy named Vince who ran a site called Truth Blaze, a cesspool of conspiracies and dog whistles, his voice smooth. I need a spin, fast, make her the bad guy, 10 grand to bury her. Vince delivered by midnight, a post screaming, cop-hating radical wins bogus suit against hero officer, doctored footage spliced from old protests. Tiana's face photoshopped onto a rioter torching a car, her data analyst job twisted into anarchist hacker, the lies so bold they stuck, shares spiking as bots pushed it wide. By morning, Atlanta woke to a storm, the blog's poison seeping into talk radio, barbershops, X-posts, a hashtag Charked Tiana, the threat, trending as folks who'd cheered her raid scoop now spat her name. Her win flipped into a villain's con. Tiana stepped outside her new midtown hideout at dusk, a rented room Marcus had secured, her burner buzzing with alerts as she scrolled the smear, her stomach sinking as she saw the fake video, her face glaring back from a fire she'd never lit, the comments a sewer of slurs, go back where you came from. Typical troublemaker, each one a jab at her skin, her fight, her truth. She called Marcus, her voice tight. They've turned it. I'm a radical now, what the hell? He cursed. Reese has to be, he's got reach, this is his play. She hung up, her boots hitting the pavement as she headed to a corner store, the air thick with summer heat. But the real heat was outside her door, a pickup truck screeching past, a guy in a red cap yelling, "We know who you are!" There's a bottle shattered at her feet, glass spraying her shins. She ducked back, her pulse racing as shouts echoed down the block, a crowd forming, flashlights bobbing in the dark, voices chanting, "Get her out!" Her victory dissolving into a mob's roar because Malone wasn't the only one swinging now. Reese had unleashed a beast, and it was coming for her blood. Drop a comment with a 1 if you think Tiana's lawsuit was worth the fight, a 2 if you'd have ducked out after the bomb. Smash that like button if Malone's courtroom loss got you pumped, and subscribe, because tomorrow's chaos will leave you speechless. So how's Tiana gonna dodge a mob that's already at her throat? Tiana Jackson pressed her back against the flimsy door of her midtown hideout, her pulse hammering as the mob's roar grew louder, a feral howl slicing through the humid Atlanta night. The pickup truck's taillights still burned into her vision, from when it screeched past minutes ago, a bottle shattering at her feet, glass biting her shins as the driver's slur, "We know who you are," echoed in her ears. She'd barely locked the deadbolt when the first brick smashed through her window, the pain exploding inward, shards skittering across the hardwood as shouts swelled outside, "Get her out, and teach her a lesson." Her new rented room, a third-floor walk-up Marcus had secured after the lawsuit win, now a target thanks to Reese's smear, that doctored footage painting her as a cop-hating radical turning neighbors into enemies overnight. She ducked low, her lean frame hugging the floor as another brick sailed through, this one scrawled with a racial slur in jagged marker, the word slicing deeper than the glass, a venom she'd faced since childhood, but never like this. A crowd of 20, maybe 30, their flashlights stabbing the dark, their boots stomping the street below like a war drum. She grabbed her go-bag, her Glock already in hand, her mind racing as flames flickered outside. A Molotov cocktail arcing through the broken window, its rag wick blazing as it hit the rug, fire licking up the fibers fast, the room filling with smoke that stung her eyes and throat. She coughed, her training kicking in. 8 years of NSA ops flashing through her skull, Kabul rooftops, Berlin alleys, places where fire meant run, and she bolted for the fire escape, her sneakers slipping on the glass-strewn floor as she yanked. The window open, the metal ladder rattling under her weight as she climbed down, heat chasing her. The mob's chants now a wall of noise. "Burn it down!" She hit the alley, her hood up, her breath ragged as she glanced back, her hideout a torch against the sky. orange tongues devouring the curtains she'd hung 2 days ago, the crowd cheering like it was a damn festival, their faces twisted with hate she knew wasn't just about the blog. It was her skin, her fight, a black woman who dared to win. She sprinted through the shadows, her lungs burning as she dodged a pickup that peeled around the corner, its headlights raking the brick walls, a guy in a camo hat leaning out. "There she is!" A beer can hurtling past her head, metal clanging, on asphalt as she cut left, her legs pumping, her mind mapping Midtown's maze because she couldn't go back, couldn't stay. Reese's lie had lit this fuse, and Malone was somewhere laughing. She texted Marcus on the move, her burner buzzing in her pocket. "Mob hit my place, torched it, need a new spot," and he fired back. "Head to 10th Street, I've got you." His NSA wheels already turning, pulling strings to get her a fresh ID, a new hideout, because he knew this wasn't random, it was war, and she was the target. She reached a quiet stretch near 10th, her chest heaving as she slipped into a boarded-up storefront, its windows dark, its door ajar, a temporary bunker where she could breathe, think, fight. She sank against the wall, her arm throbbing from the bomb graze, her shins dotted with cuts, but her laptop was safe in her bag. Her lifeline to the truth, and she booted it up, her fingers trembling as she hacked into city records, chasing the threads she'd glimpsed after the lawsuit. Reese's name popping up in zoning files, a real estate scam shoving black families out of Vine City and Sweet Auburn, condos rising where shotgun houses once stood, his red claws muscle, enforcing evictions with fists and fire. She cross-referenced bank logs Marcus had snagged, payments from shell companies to Reese's accounts, millions tied to gentrification, a racket she'd barely scratched, and now it was clawing back. The mob, his blunt tool, her home, its first casualty. She saved the data, her jaw tight, because this wasn't just about Malone anymore. It was a hydra, and she'd cut one head only to wake the rest. Hours later, Marcus met her at the new spot, a basement flat off Ponce de Leon, its walls damp, but its locks new, his scar glinting under a bare bulb as he handed her a fake ID. "Tamika Jones, accountant, you're off the grid." She nodded, her voice low. "Reese is displacing half the city. Red Claws are his dogs, I've got proof," and he whistled. "That's the jackpot, T, but they're not stopping." She knew it, felt it. The mob's hate, a taste of what was coming, and she reloaded her Glock, her eyes hard because she'd lost her home, her peace, but not her fight. Across town, Victor Malone strutted into her old Midtown building at dawn, his reinstatement official, his buzz cut catching the ash drifting from the charred wreckage, his broad frame dwarfing the rookie cops trailing him, their vests pristine against the soot-streaked walls. He'd gotten the call from Reese at midnight. "She smoked out, Vic, time to tighten the noose." And he jumped at it, leading a welfare check that was anything but, his boots crunching glass as he climbed the stairs, his flashlight sweeping the gutted room, the futon a pile of cinders, the rug a melted smear, his smirk wide as he pictured Tiana running, her calm shattered, her lawsuit win a joke now. He kicked over a singed chair, his voice a growl. She's gone, good riddance, but he wasn't done. Not when Reese had whispered, "Make her a ghost." And he had a plan, his gloved hand slipping a baggie of pills into a drawer's ashes, a stash he'd lifted from evidence last month, his prints nowhere near it, his radio crackling as he called it in. "Found drugs. Looks like our radical's a dealer," put out the word. The rookies nodded, too green to question, and Malone stepped outside, the morning sun bleaching the scene as news vans rolled up, his tip hitting the wire by 8. Suspect Tiana Jackson tied to narcotics, fire linked to drug dispute. The lie so smooth it stuck, the smear from Truth Blaze now gospel, her face plastered on every screen, a mugshot from the stop, doctored to look meaner, darker, a black menace cooked up from nothing. He leaned against his cruiser, his grey eyes glinting with glee because she'd sued him, sure. Won her 10 grand, but this was checkmate, her hideout ash, her name poison, and no jury, no judge, no nobody would touch her now, not in his city, not with his rules. Tiana saw it unfold from the basement, her laptop streaming the news, her stomach twisting as the anchor parroted Malone's frame-up. Jackson, recently awarded damages in a controversial suit, now a fugitive, the pills. A prop she'd never seen. The fire pinned on her like she'd torched her own life. She slammed the lid shut, her fists clenched because Reese had turned her win into a noose. Malone tightening it with every move, and she was underground, hunted, her new ID her only shield. But it wouldn't hold forever. She paced the damp floor, her sneakers squeaking, her mind racing as she replayed the mob's slurs, the bricks, the flames, all because she dared to fight. A black woman who'd won too loud, too clean, and now they'd made her a villain, a ghost in her own city. She stopped, her breath steadying as she met Marcus's gaze, his scar a silent vow, and she said, "They think I'm done, they're wrong." Because she'd lost everything but her spine, and she'd dig deeper, hit harder, turn their trap into her blade, because this wasn't over. Not by a mile, and Reese's empire, Malone smirked, they'd crumble before she did. Tiana Jackson hunched over her laptop in the damp basement flat off Ponce de Leon, her fingers tapping a frantic rhythm as she sifted through encrypted files, the faint drip of a leaky pipe punctuating the silence. Her new ID as Tamika Jones, a flimsy shield against the chaos swallowing her life. Her old midtown hideout now ash and headlines, screaming she was a drug-dealing fugitive, all thanks to Malone's planted pills and Reese's mob. She'd barely eaten since the fire, her lean frame wired on adrenaline and coffee, her Glock resting beside a cracked mug, her eyes bloodshot but sharp as she chased the real estate scam she'd uncovered. Reese's millions tied to Red Claws, muscle-pushing black families out of Atlanta's heart. A truth she'd turn into a spear, if she could just find the right angle. She needed an inside edge, someone who'd seen the rot up close, and Marcus Tate had delivered, his text pinging her burner at dawn. "Meet Jamal Carter, precinct clerk, Buckhead Diner, noon. He's scared but knows stuff." She pulled on, a faded jacket, her ponytail tucked under a ball cap, her sneakers silent on the stairs as she slipped out, the midday sun harsh after days underground, her mind replaying the mob's slurs, the flames licking her rug, a hatred she'd turned into fuel. Because 8 years at the NSA had taught her fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. She reached the diner off Peachtree Road by 11:50, a greasy spoon with chipped Formica tables, and a jukebox stuck on Otis Redding, her booth in the back giving her a clear view of the door, her coffee untouched as she scanned every face, her training kicking in, spotting threats in the way a guy's hand lingered near his belt, or a woman's eyes darted too fast. Jamal Carter shuffled in at 12 sharp, a lanky 26-year-old with tight curls and a nervous twitch, his precinct. Polo swapped for a hoodie, his brown skin glistening with sweat as he slid into the booth, his voice a whisper. "You, Tamika. Marcus said you're cool, I don't want to be here long." Tiana nodded, her tone low. "I'm after Malone and Reese, what have you got?" He glanced over his shoulder, his fingers drumming the table as he leaned in. "I file reports at Trinity. Seen Malone's dashcam logs go poof too many times. Not glitches, deletions. Got dates matching stops he bragged about, mostly black folks, Latinos too. He laughs it off in the break room, calls it cleaning up." She leaned closer, her pulse quickening. "Proof?" He slid a USB from his sleeve, his hand shaking. "Copied this last week. Logs showing files wiped plus memos. Reese's name on payments to Malone, Red Claws payoffs. It's dirty, real dirty." She took it, her fingers brushing his, the weight of his fear sinking in as she plugged it into her laptop, her screen blooming with data. Timestamps of erased footage, cache trails from shell accounts to Malone's name, Reese's signature on a memo green-lighting a cleanup of Vine City, a goldmine that could bury them both. She saved it fast, her voice firm. "This is big, Jamal, you're sure?" He nodded, his eyes wide. "Yeah, but they'll kill me if they know. I've heard Reese on calls. He don't play." She pocketed the drive, her mind racing, because this was the break she'd bled for. Proof to blow the lid off, and she'd take it straight to the FBI, let the feds sink their teeth in. She slipped Jamal a burner number. "Lay low. Call if it gets hot," and he bolted, his hoodie vanishing into the lunch crowd as she fired the files to Marcus. FBI now Malone's toast. By dusk, the feds moved. Marcus pulling strings from D.C., a tip hitting the Atlanta field office with Jamal's data. Agents in windbreakers raiding Trinity Avenue by 8. Malone's desk ripped open, his laptop seized, his buzz cut bobbing, as he was cuffed in the lobby, his grey eyes wild with shock as a suit read his rights. "Victor Malone, you're under arrest for evidence tampering, conspiracy, racketeering. Tiana watched it stream live from the basement, a news chopper's feed showing him shoved into a van, her chest loosening as she sank onto the cot, her breath slow because she'd done it. Turned Reese's empire against itself. Malone's badge stripped, his smirk gone, a wind she could feel in her bones. Feel in her. She cracked a rare smile, texting Marcus, "He's down, we're clear." And he shot back, "Hell yeah, T, sleep tonight." A relief she hadn't tasted since the courthouse, because the Hydra's head was off and she'd cut it clean. But Harold Reese wasn't sleeping. His silver hair slick with sweat as he paced his downtown office. The city's glow mocking him through the glass, his bourbon glass empty as he watched the arrest on his TV, Malone's cuffs a crack in his wall he couldn't patch because that precinct clerk, that damn USB meant someone had talked, and Tiana was still out there, a ghost he couldn't catch. He'd bailed Malone out of jams before, but feds were different, a beast he couldn't bribe with a councilman's smile. And he snarled into his phone, "Get him out now." His lawyer on the other end scrambling, "Cash bond, 2 hours, he's loose by 10. Reese wasn't done though, his mind spinning a darker play, because Tiana's win was a spotlight he'd snuff out, and he had the muscle to do it. By 10, Malone walked free, his smirk reborn as he hit the street, Reese's cash greasing the wheels. His first call to his uncle, "She's dead, Hal, I'm ending this." Reese's voice was ice. "Not yet, Vic, we need her scared first, I've got a guy," and hung up. His next dial to a Red Claws lieutenant, a hulking shadow named Dre, his orders sharp. "Find the clerk, shut him up, make it loud." Dre moved fast, tracking Jamal to a cousin's spot in East Atlanta, a shotgun house off Glenwood, his boots silent as he kicked the door in at midnight. Jamal's scream cut short as fists met flesh, a phone shoved in his face, recording every plea. "Tell her to back off." Blood pooling on the linoleum as Dre worked him over, a gun pressed to his temple, the video sent to Tiana's old number, a ghost line she'd ditched, but Marcus still monitored. Tiana's burner buzzed at one, Marcus's voice tight, "Check this now." And she opened the clip, her stomach lurching as Jamal's battered face filled the screen, his eyes swollen shut, his voice cracking. "Tiana, stop, they'll kill." Me, the gun's barrel glinting as the feed cut, a message flashing, "You're next." She froze, her victory souring, her hands shaking as she replayed it. Jamal's fear a knife in her gut because she'd dragged him in, promised him safety, and now Reese had flipped her win into a nightmare. Malone free, the feds too slow, and her ally paying the price. She slammed the laptop shut, her breath hitching because she'd thought Malone was down, thought the FBI had sealed it, but Reese's reach was a shadow she couldn't outrun, and Jamal's blood was on her now, a cost she hadn't seen coming. Drop a comment with a 1 if you'd risk it all like Tiana to take down corruption, a 2 if Jamal should have stayed quiet. Smash that like button if Malone's arrest got your heart racing, and subscribe because tomorrow's payback will leave you stunned. So how's Tiana gonna save Jamal when the whole city's turned against her? Tiana Jackson bolted upright in the basement flat off Ponce de Leon, her cot creaking as Jamal Carter's battered face haunted her, the grainy video replaying in her skull, his swollen eyes pleading, "Tiana, stop!" The gun to his temple, a cold promise from Reese's Red Claws, a retaliation for her FBI strike that had Malone cuffed hours ago, only for him to walk free on Reese's dime. She'd barely processed the clip, her burner still warm from Marcus Tate's call. "They've got Jamal, East Point warehouse off Camp Creek. Go now." His voice a lifeline as she grabbed her Glock, her go-bag slung over her shoulder, her lean frame taut with guilt and fury, because she'd pulled Jamal in, promised him safety, and now his blood was on her hands. A clerk who'd risked everything for her fight against a racist empire she'd barely dented. She slipped out into the Atlanta night, the air thick with humidity, her sneakers silent on the pavement as she hot-wired a beat-up sedan parked 2 blocks down, her NSA training kicking in, wires sparking under her fingers as the engine coughed. To life, her pulse a drumbeat as she floored it toward East Point, 20 miles southwest, her mind mapping the route, a sprawl of industrial lots and abandoned hulks where Red Claws thrived. She hit Camp Creek Parkway by 2, the warehouse district a maze of rusted steel and broken lights, her headlights off as she coasted past a chain-link fence, spotting the target, a squat building with peeling paint, 2 goons in leather jackets, lounging by the door, their cigarettes glowing red in the dark. She parked 100 yards out, her breath steady as she scoped the scene. Her night vision honed from years in the field, counting 3 more shadows inside through a grimy window. Jamal's silhouette slumped in a chair, tied up, his head lolling, as a fist cracked against his jaw, a muffled cry cutting the silence. She moved fast, her Glock drawn, her body low as she circled wide, finding a busted vent on the south wall, her slim frame squeezing through, dust coating her jacket as she dropped into a storage room stacked with crates, the stench of oil and sweat hitting her nose. She crept forward, her sneakers soft on concrete, peering through a gap in the wall, 5 red claws total. Dre's hulking form unmistakable from Marcus's intel, his shaved head gleaming as he barked at Jamal. "She'll see this, punk. You're—" "Her lesson!" His fist slamming Jamal's cheek again, blood spraying as the clerk whimpered, his courage broken under the blows. Tiana's gut twisted, her grip tightening on the gun as she weighed her move, 5 against 1. Bad odds even for her, but she couldn't wait, not with Jamal's life ticking down. She slipped a silencer from her bag, threading it onto the Glock, her breath shallow as she edged to the door, kicking it open with a crash. Her first shot popping Dre's knee, his scream echoing as he crumpled, her second clipping a goon's shoulder, chaos erupting as the others scrambled for cover. Their shouts a jumble of curses and panic. She dove behind a crate, bullets pinging off steel as she fired back, her aim surgical, a third thug clutching his arm, dropping his piece, the fourth lunging at her with a knife, his snarl cut short as she rolled, popping his thigh, his blade, clattering away. Jamal stirred, his voice weak. "Tiana?" And she yelled, "Stay down!" as she vaulted over, cutting his ropes with a shard of glass, her hands slick with his blood as she hauled him up, his weight sagging against her, his face a mess of bruises and cuts but alive, breathing, hers to save. The 5th goon charged, a wiry kid with wild eyes, but she sidestepped, slamming her elbow into his nose, bone crunching as he fell, the room quiet now but for Dre's groans, his leg a ruin as he glared up at her. "You're dead, bitch." His threat hollow as she dragged Jamal to the vent, shoving him through, her own exit tight but fast, the sedan's engine roaring as she peeled out, tires squealing on asphalt, the warehouse fading in her rear view. She dropped Jamal at a safe house in College Park by 3, a spot Marcus had prepped, its windows boarded, its door triple locked, his cousin waiting with a first aid kit, her voice soft. "He's tough. He'll make it." As Tiana patched his wounds, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest because she'd got him out, defied Reese's play, a win snatched from the jaws of his cruelty. She left him with a burner. Call if they come, and hit the road, her mind buzzing with relief because Jamal was safe. Malone's arrest still stung, and she'd outrun the claws, a flicker of hope in the dark. But Victor Malone wasn't. Resting, his broad frame limping into the precinct at 4, his leg bandaged from a graze he'd caught in a bar fight he'd never admit, his buzz cut damp with sweat as he watched the news, his arrest a blip drowned by a fresh headline. Reese's voice on the line hours ago. "She's got the clerk, flip it, Vic, make her bleed," a command he'd taken to heart. He'd been bailed out by 10, Reese's cash a lifeline, and now he stood in the evidence room, his smirk reborn as he slipped a call to a buddy in dispatch. "Leak this now." A story hitting the wire by 5. NSA radical shoots cop. Kills whistleblower in drug den fire. A lie so bold it stuck. Doctored footage from the warehouse spliced with old precinct cams. Tiana's face firing at shadows. Jamal's slumped form swapped for a corpse from a cold case. The pills from her burned flat now proof of her empire. Atlanta woke to the storm. News vans swarming Trinity Avenue. The anchor's voice grave. Tiana Jackson, recently sued Officer Malone, now a cop killer, $10,000 bounty on her head. Her mugshot everywhere, her lawsuit win a footnote. Her fight twisted into a terrorist's rampage, black woman turned monster. No evidence needed when Reese's machine roared. Malone leaned on his cruiser, his grey eyes glinting as he lit a cigarette, the ember flaring as he pictured her running, her calm shattered, her Glock a noose he'd tied himself, because she'd rescued Jamal, sure, dodged his claws. But this was checkmate. Her name poison, her allies spooked and no fed, no judge. No nobody would touch her now, not with his spin, his rules. Tiana saw it unfold from a gas station payphone, her sedan ditched miles back, her burner trashed, her new hideout a motel off I-85, the TV blaring as she dialed Marcus, her voice a hiss. "They're saying I shot you, killed Jamal. What the hell?" he cursed. "Reese's play, they've got deep fakes, bounty's real, you're hot." And she hung up, her fists clenched, because she'd saved Jamal, defied the odds, only to see Reese turn her into a phantom, Malone's smirk. Reborn on every screen, her victory ash in her mouth, she sank against the wall, her jacket hood shadowing her face, her mind racing as she replayed the shootout, the rescue, the cost, because she'd thought she'd won, thought Jamal's life was the prize, but Reese had flipped it, made her a hunted killer, a black menace cooked up from lies, and now the city, the feds, the world were after her blood. She checked her Glock, her last clip a cold comfort because she'd lost her flat, her name, her allies' trust, but not her spine, and she'd dig deeper, hit harder, turn their trap into her blade, because this wasn't over, not while she breathed. And Reese's empire, Malone's glee, they'd pay for every drop they'd spilled. Tiana Jackson crouched in a grimy alley off I-85, her breath fogging in the pre-dawn chill, her lean frame pressed against a dumpster as sirens wailed in the distance, Atlanta PD's manhunt closing in, her face plastered on every screen as a cop-killing terrorist, a $10,000 bounty dangling over her head thanks to Malone's fake news, and Reese's deep pockets, the city she'd fought for now a cage snapping shut. She'd ditched the sedan after dropping Jamal at the safe house, her burner trashed, her Glock down to 6 rounds, her new hideout a fleeting dream as copters buzzed overhead, their spotlights slicing the dark, her motel room abandoned when a clerk's sideways glance told her the walls had ears. She'd saved Jamal, pulled him from the Red Claw's fists, but Reese had flipped it, turned her rescue into a death sentence, the news screaming she'd shot Malone, killed her own whistleblower. A lie so twisted it stuck, her black skin the perfect canvas for their hate. 8 years of NSA grit, now her only shield. She adjusted her hood, her sneakers scuffing gravel as she darted across a vacant lot, her mind racing, her training a lifeline, because she'd dodged worse. Taliban patrols, Russian snipers. But this was home, Atlanta's streets her battlefield, and every corner held a threat, every shadow a cop or a bounty hunter itching for cash. She needed air, space, a way to flip this, and Marcus Tate was her ace, his voice crackling through a payphone she'd hit at 3. "T, you're hot. They've got checkpoints on every artery. I'm working it." His scar-edged calm a tether as she hissed, "They're everywhere, Marcus. I need a play." He'd been hacking traffic cams since the fake story broke, his DC desk a war room, his fingers rerouting feeds, sending squad cars spinning toward fake sightings in Bankhead while she slipped through Midtown, his voice steady. "Head north? I've got eyes, you're clear for now." She moved fast, her legs pumping as she weaved past Peachtree's neon glow, her hood low, her breath steady despite the weight, because Marcus was her shadow, her guide, and she trusted him with her life, a bond forged in blood and code. She found a busted ATM booth near 10th Street, its glass cracked, its camera dead. A makeshift bunker where she pulled her laptop from her bag, her last lifeline, her fingers trembling as she jacked into a public Wi-Fi signal, weak but enough. Her NSA backdoors opening streams she'd prepped weeks ago because she wouldn't run forever, wouldn't let Reese's lie bury her. She uploaded Jamal's files, the USB goldmine he'd risked his life for. Dashcam deletions, Reese's payoffs, Red Claw's muscle, splicing it with her precinct video, Malone's "no jury's gonna back a black chick," ringing loud, her voiceover. "Raw, this is the truth, they framed me, they'll frame you." A viral bomb she dropped on X, YouTube, every platform she could hit, her stream blasting live as she ducked copter sweeps, her face hidden, her words a flare. It spread like wildfire, shares spiking by 5. Tiana Truth trending as Atlanta woke to her cry, Vine City tweeting support, Buckhead bloggers picking it apart, the mayor's phone lighting up with demands, his voice stiff on a 6 a.m. presser. "We're suspending the manhunt, reviewing this evidence, stand by." A crack in the wall she'd punched through, her chest heaving as she powered down, her hideout a flicker of safety, because she'd turned the tide, hadn't she? Malone's? Lie buckling under her truth, the city pausing, the hunt stalled. She leaned against the booth's wall, her arm throbbing from the bomb graze. Her shins scabbed from the mob's glass, but her eyes burned with a flicker of triumph because she'd outrun them, outsmarted them, her NSA edge cutting through Reese's net, and she could breathe, plan, strike again. But Victor Malone wasn't breathing easy. His broad frame limping through his precinct lot at 7, his legs stiff from that bar fight graze he'd never copped to, his buzz cut damp with rage as he scrolled the mayor's backtrack, Tiana's stream. Looping on his phone, her voice a taunt, her files a noose because she'd dodged his frame-up, turned his arrest into her rally, and now the feds were sniffing again, his boys in blue eyeing him sideways. He'd walked free last night, Reese's bond a lifeline, but this was war. And he'd lost the round, his smirk gone as he dialed his uncle. "She's live, Hal. Shut it down." His voice a snarl, Reese's reply cool. "She's loud, Vic. But loud breaks easy, I've got Dre moving." Malone hung up, his fists balled, because Tiana wasn't just a ghost now, she was a voice, and he'd silence it, crush it, bury it himself. He grabbed a burner, called a Red Claws hitter, find her, end her, and hit a gas station off Northside Drive by 8, his off-duty polo stained with coffee as he fueled up, his grey eyes scanning the lot, because she was out there, hunted, but alive, and he'd be the one to fix that. Tiana slipped from the booth at 9, her laptop stashed, her Glock checked, her path north clear as Marcus's cams held the line, but the gas station loomed ahead, a pit stop she couldn't avoid, her stomach growling, her water gone, her sneakers crunching gravel as she approached, her hood up, her senses sharp. She didn't see Malone until he stepped from his truck, his limp masked by purpose, his hand flashing a taser as he lunged. "Gotcha!" His growl of victory as volts hit her ribs, her body seizing, her Glock slipping as she crumpled, the world blacking out. Her last thought a curse because she'd won, hadn't she? Stopped the hunt, turned the tide only to fall now. She woke zip-tied in a basement, concrete cold against her cheek, her head pounding, Malone looming over her. His Buzz cut a silhouette in the dim bulb's glow, his gun pressed to her temple, his voice a hiss. "Thought you'd play hero, huh?" His finger twitching on the trigger, his smirk reborn because Reese's machine had stalled, sure. But he'd caught her, flipped her stream into his trap, and now she was his, a black ghost he'd erase, her fight snuffed in a hole no one'd find. She stared up, her eyes defiant despite the pain, because she'd saved Jamal, sparked a city, and she'd twist this yet, find a crack, a way, because 8 years of grit didn't die easy, and Malone's win was a mirage, wasn't it? Drop a comment with a 1 if you'd keep fighting like Tiana, no matter the odds. A 2 if Malone's ambush has you shook. Smash that like button if her viral strike gave you chills. And subscribe, because tomorrow's showdown will flip the script hard. So how's Tiana gonna claw out of Malone's grip when the gun's already cocked? Tiana Jackson blinked awake in a dank basement, her cheek pressed to cold concrete, her wrists chafed raw by zip ties, the air thick with mildew and the metallic tang of her own blood. Victor Malone's hulking frame towering over her, his buzz cut catching the dim bulb's flicker, his service pistol jabbing her temple, its barrel a frigid promise as he ranted. "Thought you'd play hero, huh? Thought you'd take me down with your little videos." His voice a venomous growl, spit flecking her face as he pistol-whipped her, the butt cracking against her jaw, pain exploding white-hot, her vision swimming but her mind sharp, 8 years of NSA grit screaming, "Don't break, not now." She'd stopped the manhunt hours ago, her viral stream forcing the mayor's hand. But Malone had ambushed her at the gas station, his taser dropping her like a sack, and now she was here, trapped, her Glock gone, her hope a thread as he rambled. "You're nothing, just another loudmouth who don't know her place." His racist bile a flood she'd heard too often, from playgrounds to precincts, but never with a gun this close, his finger twitching, his grey eyes wild with a hate she'd sparked by daring to win. She stalled, her voice hoarse. "You're done, Malone. The feds have Jamal's files, everyone knows." Her words a lifeline as she flexed her wrists, the zip ties biting but loosening, her training kicking in, years of escape drills in hostile zones flashing through her skull, because she'd faced death before, and she'd outsmarted it every time. He laughed, a harsh bark. "Feds? Reese owns half of 'em, and you're a dead cop killer now. Nobody's coming." His gun wavering as he leaned in, his breath sour with coffee and rage, giving her the split second she needed, her hands slipping. "Free!" Her head snapping forward, forehead smashing his nose, bone crunching as he reeled, blood gushing down his chin, his roar a mix of shock and fury. She lunged, her body screaming as she wrested the pistol from his grip, her elbow slamming his throat, his gasp choking off as she rolled clear, the gun hers now, her aim steady despite the throb in her jaw. "Stay down," her command ice as he clutched his face, his leg limp from that old graze, his fight fading fast. She backed away, her breath ragged, her sneakers scuffing the floor as she found stairs, her escape a blur of adrenaline and pain, the basement door splintering under her kick, cool night air hitting her lungs as she stumbled into an alley off Northside Drive, her hood up, her body a map of bruises but alive, free. Malone's trap shattered by her own hands. She ditched the gun in a storm drain, her prints wiped, her mind racing as she hobbled to a payphone, dialing Marcus Tate. "I'm out, he had me, I've got proof." Her voice a rasp as he cursed. "T, get to City Hall, press conference at 10, go public, end this." His plan a lifeline she grabbed because she'd escaped, turned Malone's win into dust, and now she'd bury him live. She reached downtown by 9, her jacket torn, her face swollen, blood crusted on her lip as she pushed through a crowd at City Hall, reporters buzzing around a podium where the mayor droned about, reviewing evidence, her viral stream still. Echoing online, her chance to flip the script staring her down. She shoved forward, her voice cutting through. "I'm Tiana Jackson. Malone tried to kill me, he's lying, Reese is behind it all." Her wounds a testament as cameras swung, her words a bomb. "He framed me, bombed my car, burned my home." Here's the truth, her burner flashing the precinct video. Malone's "no jury's gonna back a black chick" blaring again. Her accusation live-streamed as gasps rippled, the mayor paling, Malone's name trending in real time. Cops swarmed. Not her, but him. His precinct buddies hauling him in from the basement, his nose a mess, his limp worse, his arrest a spectacle, as reporters shouted, "Officer down!" And she stood tall, her chest heaving, because she'd broken. Free turned his gun into her mic, and now he was cooked, wasn't he? The city watching, the feds circling, her fight roaring back to life. She slipped away, Marcus meeting her at a diner off Peachtree, his scar crinkling as he grinned. "You're a damn legend, T." Her fries untouched as she nodded. He's done. Reese next. Her victory ablaze, because she'd outrun the hunt, outsmarted the trap, and now Malone was cuffed, his career ash, her bruises a badge of triumph she'd wear proud. But Harold Reese wasn't grinning, his silver hair slick with tension as he watched the presser from his downtown office, his bourbon glass shattering in his grip. Tiana's live accusation a noose tightening, Malone's arrest a crack in his empire he couldn't cork because she'd escaped, turned his nephew's play into her stage. And now the city, the feds, the world were sniffing his trail, Jamal's files, her stream, her wounds a spotlight he couldn't dim. He'd underestimated her, a black woman he'd thought he'd crush, and now she'd flipped it, made him the hunted, his red claw's muscle useless against her fire. He dialed Dre, his voice a snarl. "She's loud, end her now," and Dre moved. A bomb rigged in Tiana's new safe house, the one Marcus had set with a decoy, a mannequin in her bed, the blast rocking midtown at midnight, windows shattering blocks away, flames clawing the sky as news choppers swarmed, the anchor's voice grave. Tiana Jackson's hideout bombed, terrorist attack suspected, dozens feared dead. A lie Reese spun, the decoy's charred remains her corpse, her bounty doubled, her name a national curse. Tiana saw it from a motel off I-20, her laptop streaming the chaos, her stomach lurching as Marcus cursed beside her. "They hit the decoy, T, you're a ghost now." His plan a shield that had saved her, but not the narrative, because Reese had turned her press win into a massacre, the blast pinned on her. Her fight twisted into a terrorist's rampage, black radical gone rogue, no evidence needed when the flames roared. She slammed the table, her fists clenched, because she'd escaped Malone, accused him live. Thought she'd won, only to see Reese torch her victory, make her a monster, the city recoiling, the feds doubling down, her allies spooked. She checked her Glock, her last clip a grim vow, her jaw throbbing as she met Marcus's gaze. "They think I'm dead, good, we use it," because she'd lost her home, her name, her breath but not her spine, and she'd dig deeper, hit harder. turn their bomb into her blade, because this wasn't over. Not while she lived, and Reese's empire, Malone's cuffs. They'd pay for every lie they'd built. Tiana Jackson lay low in a Marietta motel, the hum of I-75 vibrating through the thin walls, her bruised jaw aching as she sat cross-legged on a sagging bed, her laptop glowing in the dark, her lean frame cloaked in a hoodie, her Glock resting on a pillow because she was a ghost now, presumed dead after Reese's bomb torched her decoy safehouse, the city reeling from headlines branding her a terrorist, her fight twisted into a monster's tale, but she was alive, breathing, plotting, her NSA edge sharper than ever. She'd escaped Malone's basement hours ago, accused him live at City Hall, watched him cuffed again only for Reese to flip it with a blast that doubled her bounty. But Marcus Tate's decoy had saved her, his voice steady when they'd regrouped. "Here at midnight. You're off the grid, T, let's use it." His scar glinting as he paced the room, his laptop synced to hers, their war room a tangle of cables and takeout cartons. She nodded, her eyes burning with focus because she'd lost everything, home, name, safety. But not her will, and Reese's empire was cracking. Malone's arrest a chink she'd widen, because 8 years chasing global threats had taught her one truth: hit the head, the body falls. She pulled up the real estate files Jamal had risked his life for, her fingers tracing Reese's payoffs, millions flowing from shell companies to a name she hadn't clocked before: Edwin Voss, a developer whose glass towers rose over Vine cities. Hashes, his gentrification a bulldozer flattening black lives, Red Claws muscle his fists, a syndicate she'd barely glimpsed, now glaring back. Marcus dug deeper, his NSA hacks peeling Voss's layers. 55 ex-banker owns half downtown Reese's cash cow. Red Claws guard his sights, his voice a growl as they mapped his office. A sleek high-rise off Peachtree, its security tight but not tight enough. Because Tiana wasn't running, she was striking, and Voss was her key. She moved at dusk, her hood up, her fake ID as Tamika Jones a pass through Marietta's shadows. Her sedan swapped for a borrowed bike, its pedals pumping as she hit downtown by 8. The high-rise a monolith of steel and glass, its lobby buzzing. With suits, her janitor's uniform a thrift store grab, her cart a prop as she slipped past guards, her heart steady, her training a cloak because she'd infiltrated worse. Syrian bunkers, Moscow safe houses, and this was just a greedy man's castle. She rode the service elevator to the 30th floor, her mop a shield as she rolled past Voss's suite, its oak door locked, its keypad glowing, her lockpick a whisper as she cracked it, the room dark but for city lights spilling through blinds, her sneakers silent on carpet as she rifled his desk, her gloved hands finding ledgers, thick with numbers, millions in dirty cash, payoffs to Reese, Malone, Red Claws, a paper trail of greed and blood she stuffed into her bag, her breath hitching as a guard's boots thudded outside, her body flattening under the desk, his flashlight sweeping past, her escape a heartbeat away. She was out by 9. The ledger's hers, her bike a blur as she hit the motel. Marcus waiting, his eyes wide as she dumped the hall. "This is it, T. DOJ's gold." His voice a spark as they scanned the pages. Voss's signature on every deal. Reese's cut clear. Red Claw's violence budgeted like rent, a syndicate laid bare. She fired it to the feds, her encrypted line buzzing as Marcus routed it through DC. The DOJ pouncing by 10, agents storming Voss's tower, his tailored suit rumpled as they cuffed him in his penthouse, his protests drowned by sirens. News. Choppers circling as the anchor barked. Edwin Voss arrested, racketeering conspiracy. Ties to Councilman Reese. Tiana grinning from the motel, her chest swelling, because she'd gone dark, hit hard, and now Voss was down. Reese's empire, teetering. A win she'd clawed from the ashes, wasn't it? The city waking to her truth, the feds closing in. She sank onto the bed, her bruises throbbing but her spirit high because she'd turned Malone's trap into her blade. Voss's fall a domino she'd tipped, and Reese's shadow was shrinking, her fight roaring back, a ghost they couldn't kill. But Harold Reese wasn't shrinking, his silver hair slick with panic as he watched Voss's arrest from his office, his bourbon glass trembling, Tiana's phantom hand choking his world. Because she was dead, wasn't she? The bomb had worked. The decoy charred, yet here she was, her ledgers in the Fed's grip, Voss's cuffs a noose around his neck too, a crack he couldn't plug. He'd underestimated her, a black woman he'd thought he'd erased, and now she'd struck again. Her invisibility, his nightmare, his empire bleeding. Malone locked up, Voss nabbed, his red claws restless. He dialed Dre, his voice a hiss. She's alive, torch her, find her. But Dre was out, so he called Malone, his nephew's burner buzzing in lockup. Vic, you're out on bail soon, she's back. Burn her world, a vow Malone took with a smirk. His release a technicality, Reese greased by noon, his broad frame limping free, his buzz cut glinting as he rallied a Red Claws hit squad, 10 men in black vans, their target the motel Marcus had leaked as a decoy. A trap Tiana didn't see. They hit it too, Molotovs arcing through the Marietta night. The motel a fireball as flames devoured the lot, glass popping, screams piercing the dark, the squad peeling out as copters swarmed, news flashing. Tiana Jackson's hideout torched. Multiple casualties feared, Malone's smirk wide as he watched from a safe distance, his legs stiff but his glee alive, because she'd nailed Voss, sure, sparked raids, but this was payback. Her ghost burned again, her fight snuffed. Wasn't it? The city recoiling, the feds stalling, his rules back in play. Tiana saw it from a gas station 10 miles out, her bike parked, her laptop streaming the blaze, her stomach lurching as Marcus cursed beside her. They hit the wrong spot, T. You're clear. His decoy a shield again. But not the story, because Reese had flipped her win into another massacre. The motel's ashes pinned on her. Terrorist strikes again. Her bounty tripled, her name a curse. Black radical gone wild. No proof needed when fire spoke. She slammed her fist on the counter, her jaw clenched, because she'd infiltrated Voss, toppled him, thought she'd won, only to see Malone torch her victory, Reese's machine roaring back, her allies shaken, the feds spooked. She checked her Glock, her last clip a grim vow, her eyes hard as she met Marcus's gaze. They think I'm Ash, we hit harder, because she'd lost her flat, her name, her breath, but not her spine, and she'd dig deeper, strike faster, turn their fire into her blade, because this wasn't over, not while she lived. And Reese's empire, Malone's smirk, they'd pay for every spark they'd lit. Tiana Jackson pedaled through the West End's shadowed streets, her borrowed bike creaking under her lean frame, the Atlanta night heavy with the scent of burnt rubber and jasmine, her hoodie soaked with sweat, her Glock tucked tight against her ribs, because she was a ghost twice over now. The Marietta motel's ashes still smoking 10 miles north, Reese's latest frame-up branding her a terrorist again. Her bounty tripled, her name a curse, but she was alive, breathing, striking, her NSA, grit a blade she'd honed for this moment. 8 years of dodging death now her shield as she lured Victor Malone into her endgame. She'd watched the motel blaze from a gas station, Marcus Tate's decoy saving her again, his voice a lifeline. They think you're toast, T, use it. His scar-edged calm fueling her as she ditched the bike's chain, swapped it for a fresh one, her plan crystallizing because Voss's arrest had cracked Reese's empire. Malone's firebombing a desperate swing, and now she'd finish it, trap the cop who'd mocked her, burned her, hunted her, his racist venom the spark. She'd douse for good. She'd hacked his burner from the motel, Marcus routing her into Red Claw's chatter, pinpointing an abandoned factory off Joseph E. Boone, a rusted hulk where Malone bragged to his squad, "She's Ash, I'm king." His limp slowing him, but his ego roaring, a meat she'd baited with a fake tip. Tiana spotted factory midnight, her voice distorted through a proxy, his reply a snarl, "I'll bury her myself." A trap he'd never see. She hit the factory by 11, her sneakers silent on cracked concrete, the air thick with rust and oil, her laptop rigged to a busted conveyor, its Wi-Fi weak but live, her stream prepped, her Glock checked, because this wasn't just a fight. It was theater, a stage to gut Malone's lies, Reese's machine, the city watching as she turned their fire into her truth. She scouted the layout, her night vision sharp, beams sagging overhead, shadows pooling in corners, a catwalk 30 feet up her perch, her trapdoor a loose panel she'd rigged to drop, her breath steady as she climbed, her bruises throbbing, her jaw stiff from his pistol whip, but her focus iron because she'd lost her home, her name, her peace, and now she'd take his. Malone rolled in at 12, his broad frame limping through the factory door, his buzz cut glinting under a flickering bulb, 10 Red Claws goons fanning out, their boots thudding, their flashlights stabbing the dark, his voice a bellow. "She's here, find her." His confidence a mask, his grey eyes darting because he'd burned her twice, framed her thrice, and still she haunted him, a black woman he couldn't kill, his racist taunts a boomerang he'd never ducked. Tiana hit record, her stream live to millions, her lens hidden in the catwalk's rust, her voice low. "This is Tiana Jackson alive, watch this." Her signal bouncing through Marcus's relays, X lighting up as she dropped the panel, her silhouette a ghost as she leveled her Glock. "Malone, you're done." Her shout echoing, his head snapping up, his smirk faltering as she fired a warning shot, concrete dust exploding at his feet, his goons freezing, her stream spiking. "Sakonsaki, Tiana lives." Trending as he roared, "You're dead, bitch!" She didn't flinch, her aim steady. "Tell him, Victor, tell him how you framed me, bombed my car, burned my flat, Reese's orders." Her words a whip, his face purpling as he laughed, a harsh rasp. "Yeah, I did it. Torched your ass. Reese paid me, you're nothing. Just a loudmouth who wouldn't stay down." His confessions spilling live, his goons shifting, unsure because he thought she was bluffing, thought the dark hid his win, but millions heard, saw, gasped, his racism. Raw, his crimes bare, her trap sprung. She kept him talking. "Keep going, Vic, the pills, the mob, Jamal." Her voice steel as he snarled, "Planted the drugs, sent the boys, beat that snitch, all for Reese. He owns this city, not you." His limp pacing, his gun drawn but wild. Because he didn't see the copters closing in, Marcus's tip to APD hitting as sirens wailed. Blue lights flooding the factory, his goons bolting, his rage peaking. "You'll rot for this." But she smiled, thin and cold. "Not tonight." Her stream a beacon as cops swarmed, his cuffs clicking mid-rant, his confession a noose he'd tied himself. The city stunned, her victory blazing, because she'd lured him, broke him, won, hadn't she? Harold Reese watched from his downtown office, his silver hair disheveled, his bourbon glass empty as Tiana's stream looped on his TV. Malone's words a death knell. Reese paid me, trending worldwide, his empire crumbling, his nephew nabbed, Voss locked, his red claws scattering. Because she'd outsmarted him. Hey ghost he'd burned twice, her black defiance his ruin. And now the feds, the mayor, the world were on his tail, his jet fueled at Hartsfield-Jackson, his escape a sprint as he bolted, his voice a hiss. She's dead. She has to be. But she wasn't, and he knew it. His panic a flood as he fled. The city's eyes on him, her stream his judge. Tiana slipped off the catwalk, her Glock stashed, her bike waiting as cops hauled Malone out, his limp dragging, his smirk gone, her chest heaving with a triumph she'd clawed from hell because she'd turned his trap into her stage, his confession, her blade. And Reese was running, the Hydra headless, her fight roaring to millions, a win she'd savor, a ghost they couldn't kill. She hit a rally at noon. Vine City's streets packed, her hood down, her bruises proud, her voice live again. "We've got 'em, keep pushing," her stream hitting 10 million, the crowd chanting her name, her victory afire, because Malone was down, Reese exposed. The city hers, wasn't it? The feds closing in, the truth out, her spine unbroken. But Edwin Voss wasn't done. His cuffs off on a technicality. A judge Reese owned, his tailored suit crisp as he watched from a safe house, his millions intact, his voice a whisper to a sniper. End her now, a rifle tracking Tiana's rally. The shot ringing out, a crack splitting the air. The bullet missing her skull by an inch, screams erupting as she dove, chaos swallowing the crowd, her bike toppling. Her fate a blur as she vanished, the stream cutting. Her triumph a question because Voss had swung, Reese had fled, and she was gone, wasn't she? The city holding its breath, her fight teetering, her ghost flickering, the war raging on. Months later, Atlanta simmered under a late summer haze, the city's pulse unsteady as Victor Malone's trial unfolded in a packed Fulton County courtroom, his buzz cut dulled by jailhouse grime, his broad frame slouched in an orange jumpsuit, his grey eyes hollow as prosecutors played Tiana Jackson's factory stream, his confession booming. "Yeah, I did it, torched your ass, Reese paid me." A noose he'd tied himself, the jury's gasps a chorus as witnesses piled on, Jamal Carter's bruised testimony, precinct logs, Voss's ledgers, every word a nail. In his coffin, his racist rants a public scar the city couldn't scrub. He spilled everything, his voice cracking under plea deal pressure, naming Reese, the Red Claws, dirty cops, a dozen developers, his limp leg twitching as he traded years for truth. Reese ran it, I just swung. His smirk gone, his empire. Ash, the courtroom stunned again, because Tiana's ghost had broken him, hadn't she? Her fight echoing beyond the grave, her stream a blade that kept cutting. Harold Reese didn't see the verdict. His silver hair a memory as feds nabbed him in Mexico, his private jet grounded on a dusty airstrip near Tijuana, his bourbon-soaked escape cut short 6 weeks after he'd fled the factory bust, his cuffs clicking as agents hauled him back, his empire a ruin, Voss's arrest, Malone's words, Tiana's ledgers a net he couldn't slip, his gentrification racket exposed, Vine City cheering as his condos stalled, his Red Claws scattering, his councilman's smile a ghost on old campaign posters because she'd outrun him, outsmarted him, a black woman he'd mocked now his judge, her victory a shadow he'd never shake. Edwin Voss smirked on TV though, his tailored suit pristine as he walked free from a downtown lockup, a technicality Reese's last favor had bought, a judge's gavel twisted by dirty cash, his voice smooth on a live interview. Justice prevailed. I'm clean, his millions intact, his high-rises rising. His sniper's miss at Tiana's rally a hiccup he'd shrugged off, because she was dead, wasn't she? The Vine City chaos her end, her bike toppled, her stream cut. The city mourning, a ghost. His empire safe, his gentrification humming. A kingpin untouched, or so he thought. But Tiana Jackson wasn't dead, her lean frame coiled in an NSA bunker off Maryland's coast, her bruises faded, her jaw healed, her hoodie swapped for a tactical vest, her Glock holstered as she stared at a wall of screens. Marcus Tate beside her, his scar glinting under fluorescent buzz, their war room a fortress of code and steel, because she'd faked it, vanished after the sniper's shot, her bike a prop, her death a play Marcus had rigged, a decoy crowd scattering as she slipped underground, her streams cut a signal. To the world she'd lost, but she hadn't, not by a mile. Her 8 years of grit a fire that burned hotter now, because Reese was down, Malone was cooked, but Voss was the head, and she'd sever it clean. She'd gone dark after the rally, her bike ditched, her hood up as Marcus whisked her to a safe house, her mind racing as they'd pieced it, Voss's technicality a clue, his smirk a taunt, his ledgers a map to something bigger, because the numbers didn't stop at Atlanta, they stretched overseas. Shell companies in Dubai, Zurich, Lagos, millions funneled to accounts tied to terror cells, arms deals, a global web she'd sniffed in her NSA days but never pinned, until now, Voss's gentrification affront, his cash a blood trail she'd follow to the end. She hacked his network from the bunker, her fingers a blur. Marcus routing her through encrypted grids, her screens blooming with wire transfers, emails, a photo of Voss shaking hands with a warlord in Yemen, proof he'd bankrolled bombings, coups chaos, Atlanta's condos a laundromat for terror, Reese a pawn, Malone a thug, her fight bigger than she'd dreamed, because she'd thought it was local, personal, a racist cop mocking her in court, but it was global, lethal, a hydra she'd gut from root to crown. She surfaced on a global stream at noon, her face unmasked, her voice steel. I'm Tiana Jackson, alive, and this is the truth. Her bunker a stage as she dropped the bomb, Voss's ledgers live, his terror ties bared. He funded death. Not just here, everywhere, this ends now. Her words a flare, X crashing. YouTube freezing, millions watching as feds stormed Voss's interview, his mic live as cuffs snapped, his I'm clean cut to a scream. You can't. But they did, his empire imploding, his towers seized, his cash frozen, the world stunned because she'd faked her death, dug deeper, turned a sniper's miss into his noose, a black operative they'd never see coming. Atlanta reeled, the courtroom's echo dwarfed by Voss's fall, headlines screaming, NSA hero busts terror syndicate, the mayor's voice shaky on air, we owe her. Vine City dancing, Bankhead toasting, her mugshot swapped for a grainy bunker still. Her name a hymn because she'd toppled Malone, chased Reese, gutted Voss. Her fight a wave that drowned the rot, her ghost a legend, wasn't it? The city reborn, the feds humbled, her spine unbroken. She stood in the bunker, her chest heaving, Marcus grinning. You did it, T. His scar a badge as she nodded. Not done. Her eyes hard, because Voss was down, but threads lingered, cells uncaught, a war she'd wage, her Glock a vow, because she'd lost her flat, her peace, her breath, but gained a world. Her fight a flame that'd never die, and Reese's jet, Malone's cuffs, Voss's scream. They'd pay for every lie they'd built. She stepped outside, Marilyn's air crisp, her vest off, her hoodie back, her stride steady as she hit a chopper. Fort Meade waiting, her debrief a formality. Director Lynn Carter's voice warm. Agent Jackson, you've rewritten the book. Her commendation a nod. Her next mission a whisper because terror didn't sleep and neither would she. Her Atlanta wore a spark, her global strike ablaze, her ghost a force they'd never tame because she'd vowed to keep fighting. Hadn't. She, a black woman mocked in court, now a titan, the stunned world her proof. Tiana Jackson's journey unveils profound truths about resilience, justice, and the fight against systemic racism. Her story teaches us that courage isn't just facing danger, but turning it into a weapon, as she did when Malone's mockery sparked her crusade, proving one voice can rattle a corrupt empire. Her 8-year NSA grit shows that preparation and skill can outmatch brute power, outsmarting a racist cop and his syndicate with precision, not rage. It's a reminder that underestimation is a fatal flaw. Malone and Reese saw her blackness as weakness, only to fall to her strength. A lesson for anyone dismissing others based on prejudice. Tiana's faked death and global strike reveal the power of adaptability, turning setbacks like the sniper's miss into victories, showing that survival demands reinvention. Her fight also exposes the cost of truth, losing her home, her name, her peace, but proves it's worth it when justice prevails, toppling Voss's terror web and freeing Atlanta's oppressed. It's a call to see beyond headlines, to question narratives like the terrorist label pinned on her, because lies crumble under scrutiny. Finally, her story underscores community, from Jamal's bravery to Marcus's loyalty, proving no battle is won alone. Tiana's triumph isn't just hers, it's a beacon for anyone facing injustice, a vow that persistence can shatter even the deepest rot. So, what's the takeaway? Stand firm, fight smart, and never let the world define you, because even a mocked voice can stun it silent. What part of Tiana's fight hit you hardest? Drop a comment with your thoughts, hit like if her grit inspires you, subscribe for more tales of justice, and share to spread her fire. Thanks for riding this wild journey with us, and here's to courage lighting your path ahead.